The last piece of information I want to give you about the origins of Frankenstein, the story, is that this isn't a new story, right? So Mary Shelley has actually pulled from this ancient Jewish folklore legend about the golem. And the golem is, it dates back hundreds of years before Shelley's writing. It's a story of a humanoid creature that is created from elements of the earth, and he's animated through the use of mystical powers. In the early golem stories, he's not actually a monster. He's just sort of like a dumb human, right? Like he doesn't have all of the brain functioning, so he doesn't have like a personality or intellect. Later stories, he actually becomes more of a monster. So she does take some inspiration from this folklore legend as well to create her tale. Okay, so just a really quick summary of some of the themes you're going to be looking out for when you read Frankenstein. We've talked about the theme of alienation and isolation before, right? And that has a lot to do with Shelley's own background. But you'll see Victor kind of isolate himself from other people. You'll see the monster becoming alienated from Victor, becoming alienated from society. So that's going on. The theme of the double is really interesting. I don't actually subscribe to this theory, but there are some people who believe that the monster actually is never real. He's just a figment of Victor's imagination, and he's actually like the double of Victor. He's the doppelganger of Victor, so he's like the other side of Victor. It's an interesting theory, I think, especially if you read the novel through a particular lens, but again, I don't know, it's just a thing to think about. The sublime, we've talked about that a lot already, right? So you'll see the sublime in nature, the quest for the sublime in creating the human. The theme of hubris, we talked about with Prometheus, right? The mere fact that Victor's trying to create a human is a showing of his hubris. The theme of creation, the theme of destruction, right? Creating life and then not having the power to destroy it. Going back to kind of the question about progress and modernity, right? Is this new, fancy, modern, progressive world that we've created for ourselves, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or is it kind of a double-edged sword? The theme of agency is important too. Whether the monster is an autonomous, agent is a question. And then the concept of othering, right? The monster is always othered in terms of, you know, being not like everyone else in society. So this is just, if you're sort of looking out for themes, these are the kinds of things that you're going to look out for. A little bit about the setting of the novel. We don't have, I mean, we have a date that Shelley writes it, but she actually makes the date kind of ambiguous for us because it's, she dates Walton's letters with a 17 dash. So we know that it's sometime in the 18th century or the 1700s, but there's no reference to anything specific that's going to pinpoint the date for us. But we do know that Shelley intended for the novel to be set in the latter part of the 18th century. So at the end of the Enlightenment and the beginning of the Romantic period. The other thing that's going on in this time period is the Industrial Revolution, right? So this is when we're building factories. There's this rapid technological innovation that's increasing agricultural and industrial production and actually totally transforming the way that we construct our lives. We'll talk more about this in the second half of the semester, but it's like Mary Shelley can see these factories being built on the horizon, and she can kind of understand like the potential for crazy stuff to go on. The thing about Frankenstein is that it's an epistolary novel, and that just means it's told through letters. So that adds this really mysterious element because we're getting like this secondhand story. So remember, Victor's rescued by Walton, and Victor tells his story to Walton, and Walton tells Victor's story to the person that he's writing the letters to, right? And then we also get the creature relaying his story to Victor too. So the monster we're getting some kind of secondhand narratives there. So when you build this secondhand story, you get these unreliable narrators, right? We don't know is Victor crazy? Like, how much of this is the truth? It doesn't really add this mysterious element to the text. The thing to remember that people mistake all the time is that Victor Frankenstein is the human, right? And the monster that he creates doesn't have a name, so when you call him Frankenstein, you're actually referring to the wrong thing. Victor's the protagonist. he is the product of this really idealistic Enlightenment education, right? He's been sent to the right schools. He wants to be a scientist, but he's a little bit skeptical of modern science because he's really interested in becoming famous, right? And that's when he becomes obsessed with creating life from spare body parts because he thinks this is the thing that will get him famous. And it's really neat to see the story of Frankenstein as like a story of mental illness because he devolves. By the end of the novel, he has totally lost all of his rational capacity, and he's consumed by these really primitive emotions of fear and hatred. So that's another thing to understand. I mean, the fact that Victor wants to create life, it shows us that he's not interested in modern science. He's actually interested in old science, what we kind of refer to as alchemy. So people trying to create like gold out of, substances. Victor's more interested, he thinks that the modern natural science that he's studying is too practical. It's not going to actually penetrate the mysteries of nature. So he wants this glory. He wants acclaim. And so he's really driven by the quest for the sublime. But that's what leads to his downfall, right? The romantics in general are really critical of like the ordinary and the utilitarian, and they tend to favor like the glorious. So one thing that you can definitely see here is that Frankenstein has these dreams of being a god, right? And attaining glory and grandeur. So he talks about this. He says, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, but the latter soon obtained my undivided attention. And he tells us it's not about wealth, but he wants the glory, right? If I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death, how famous would I be, right? He questions himself, right? He says, look, I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself or try to create something of simpler organization, like a dog or a chipmunk or something, but he admits that his imagination was so exalted when he has this little successful attempt, and he's like, I wanted to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. So he talks about, deciding to begin the creation, and he's in such a hurry that he decides to make the parts bigger instead of smaller because smaller parts are harder to work with. And you're like, well, that's one of your problems, right? Because you made your creature bigger than you. You know what he wants? He wants the species to bless him as a creator. There's a really feminist interpretation of this novel, right? Where you can look at Victor as trying to like give birth, literally, to some kind of creature. So, but he really, really just wants the acclaim, right? He wants people to owe their lives to him. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. And so it's hard to say whether he starts out with like kind of noble intentions, or if he's just, if from the start he's just trying to do something that's just totally out of the realm of possibility, and therefore like, it's never gonna turn out okay, right? So that's kind of all I have to say about the novel itself. It brings up a lot of really interesting questions, right? Which you'll talk about in the voice thread. I have some videos for you to watch that take sort of a modern spin on the theme of scientific creation and discovery. So think about those things as you're reading the text. If you have this one's a tough one, so if you have any questions, just let me know. But for now, I think that's all I have to say. Enjoy the novel.